Walt Finch expected gold when he dug under the lone pine. What he found instead was a body in his coat, a grave marked with his name, and a promise someone didn't forget. Walt Finch squinted at the horizon, the desert sun baking the wrinkles into his face like cracks in dried mud. 20 years. 20 years since he'd last felt this grit between his teeth, this relentless heat on his skin. 20 years since he'd buried the gold. He wasn't the same man anymore. The outlaw swagger had faded, replaced by a weariness that settled deep in his bones. But the lure of that gold, his share, had been a persistent whisper in the back of his mind. Now he was back to claim it. He adjusted the brim of his hat, the leather stiff and unfamiliar. The stagecoach had dropped him miles from his destination. He preferred it that way, no fanfare, no curious eyes, just him and the desert. The lone pine, that was all he needed. A landmark etched in his memory, a silent sentinel guarding his past. A past he desperately hoped wouldn't come back to haunt him. He spat on the dusty ground, a nervous habit he thought he'd kicked. Old habits die hard, especially for an outlaw trying to go straight. The image flashed in his mind, the full moon hanging fat and low in the sky, casting long shadows across the desert floor. 5 men, including him, sweating under the weight of the strong box. The gold glinted even in the moonlight, a promise of riches and a new life. He remembered arguing with Jeb about where to bury it. Jeb, always the hothead, wanted to hide it in a cave. Walt had insisted on the lone pine. Easier to find, he'd argued, a landmark no one could miss. He shivered despite the heat. He also recalled his heavy wool coat, the one his mother made him, snagging on a branch as they lowered the strong box. He'd curse it under his breath, tearing it free, leaving a small piece of fabric behind. A piece of fabric that might be important now. Jeb, where was Jeb now? Were any of them still alive? And more importantly, did they remember the gold? Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, turning the sky into a blinding white canvas. Walt's canteen was almost empty. He crested a small rise, and there it was. The lone pine. It stood defiant against the harsh landscape, its needles a dark green against the pale sand. It was taller than he remembered, more imposing. The years had been kind to the tree, less so to him. He walked towards it, his boots sinking slightly into the sand. The air grew heavy, a sense of foreboding settling over him like a shroud. He could almost feel eyes on him, watching his every move. He circled the tree, his gaze sweeping the ground. The spot. It should be right here. A patch of slightly darker earth, disturbed years ago but now seemingly undisturbed. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a rusty shovel. The digging was about to begin, and with it maybe the unearthing of something far more sinister than gold. The shovel bit into the hard-packed earth. Sweat dripped from Walt's brow, stinging his eyes. He dug deeper, the silence broken only by the scrape of metal against stone. He expected the satisfying thud of the strongbox any minute, but instead the shovel struck something wooden. Not the heavy, metal-bound wood of a strongbox. This was lighter, hollow-sounding. His heart pounded in his chest, a cold dread creeping up his spine. He dropped to his knees, digging with his hands now frantic. The outline emerged from the dirt, a long, rectangular box. A coffin. He stared at it, dumbfounded. This wasn't right. This couldn't be right. He grabbed the shovel again, prying at the lid, the wood groaning in protest. With a final heave, the lid splintered, revealing the dark interior. A wave of stale, earthy air rushed out, carrying with it the stench of death. He recoiled, his stomach churning. What in God's name was going on? He held his breath and peered into the darkness. A skeletal hand, bone-white against the decaying fabric, reached up as if beckoning him closer. He stumbled back, gagging. Then he saw the coat, a heavy wool coat, familiar beyond doubt. His coat, the one his mother had made him, the one he'd torn on the pine branch all those years ago. The small tear was still there, a jagged reminder of his past. His heart hammered against his ribs. He forced himself to look closer. The face was gaunt, unrecognizable, but beneath the coat, he saw a faded note clutched in the dead man's hand. He reached in, his fingers brushing against cold bone, and pulled it free. Unfolding it with trembling hands, he read the single, chilling word scrawled in faded ink. Walt. The gold was gone, replaced by this grotesque mockery. Someone knew he was coming back, someone had been waiting, but who and why? His mind raced. Jeb, could it be Jeb? He always held a grudge, always thought Walt got more than his fair share. Or maybe Sila's, the quiet one, the one nobody ever suspected of anything. He disappeared after the heist, said he was going to start a new life. Maybe this was his new life, revenge. Then there was Maria. He'd left her behind, promised to send for her. He never did. Women scorned could do terrible things. He rubbed his temples, trying to clear his head. And Sheriff Bartlett. He'd been sniffing around even back then, suspicious of their sudden wealth. Maybe he'd finally pieced it all together, waited patiently for Walt to return. He looked around, his eyes scanning the horizon. He was alone, but he didn't feel alone. He felt hunted. He had to figure out who was behind this, and fast, before they finished what they started. He was no longer digging for gold. He was digging for survival. He returned to the coffin, a grim curiosity pulling him back. He needed to find something, anything, that could point him in the right direction. He knelt beside the open box, the stench less potent now, almost familiar. He ran his hand along the dead man's coat, feeling for pockets, anything out of the ordinary. Empty. He checked the man's trousers, nothing. Then, almost as an afterthought, he examined the hand that hadn't been clutching the note. Wedged between two fingers, almost hidden from view, was a small, tarnished silver button. Not just any button. It had a tiny, almost imperceptible symbol etched into its surface, a coiled rattlesnake. He didn't recognize it immediately, but something about it felt significant. He carefully pried the button loose. It was his only lead, a tiny piece of the puzzle in a vast, deadly game. He pocketed it, a sliver of hope in the face of overwhelming despair. It was time to start digging in a different way. He reburied the coffin, covering it with the same earth he'd unearthed. He didn't want anyone else stumbling upon it, not yet. He needed time to figure out what that button meant. He saddled his horse, the leather creaking in protest. He knew of only one place where he might find answers. Redemption, a ghost town a few days' ride to the north. It was a haven for outcasts and forgotten souls, a place where secrets lingered like dust in the wind. If anyone knew about the rattlesnake button, it would be someone in Redemption. As he rode, the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The desert grew colder, the shadows longer. He pulled his hat lower, a sense of unease settling over him. He was riding into the unknown, towards a town that held both promise and peril. He just hoped the answers he sought wouldn't lead him to his own redemption of the deadly kind. The sign read Redemption, population unknown. It was more rust than paint. Walt urged his horse forward, the silence of the town pressing in on him. Buildings stood like skeletal remains, their windows dark and empty sockets staring out at the desert. A tumbleweed rolled across the dusty street, a lonely dance in the desolate landscape. The only sound was the creak of his saddle leather and the rhythmic thud of his horse's hooves. He passed a saloon with swinging doors hanging askew, a general store with a collapsed roof, and a church with a steeple pointing accusingly at the sky. He dismounted in front of what looked like the town's only remaining occupied building. A dimly lit cantina. A flickering lantern cast long, distorted shadows on the porch. He tied his horse to the hitching post, his hand instinctively resting on the butt of his revolver. Redemption. It felt more like damnation. The cantina was dimly lit and smelled of stale beer and desperation. A handful of patrons sat scattered around the room, their faces etched with hard living. At the bar, an old-timer with a grizzled beard nursed a whiskey, his eyes like chips of flint. Walt approached the bar, the floorboards creaking under his weight. He ordered a whiskey, then casually placed the silver button on the counter. "Ever seen one of these before?" he asked, his voice low. The old-timer picked up the button, his gaze intense. He turned it over in his calloused fingers. "That's a long time gone symbol," he rasped, his voice like dry leaves skittering across the ground. "Best left buried." "All that buried things have a way of coming back," Walt replied, his eyes fixed on the old man's face. The old-timer chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Some things are best forgotten, son. Some graves are best left undisturbed. Especially those dug in the desert." He pushed the button back towards Walt. "You're digging in the wrong place." The whiskey burned a path down his throat, but it didn't warm him. The old-timer's words echoed in his head. He saw Jeb again, his face flushed with anger as he argued about the gold split. "We all risked our necks, Walt. I deserve more." Sila's, usually so quiet, had been unusually jumpy that night, constantly looking over his shoulder. He remembered Sila's clutching a small, silver charm, a coiled rattlesnake, now that he thought about it, whispering something about needing protection. Protection from what? And then there was the argument between Maria and Jeb. Maria had discovered Jeb was planning to run off with all the gold himself. Walt had intervened, stopping Jeb, but the tension had lingered like a storm cloud. He'd thought they'd buried it all that night, along with the gold. But maybe he was wrong. Maybe the seeds of betrayal had been sown long before, and now they were finally blooming, in a coffin with his name on it. He finished his whiskey and left the cantina, the old-timer's words still ringing in his ears. He glanced at the other patrons as he passed, their faces unreadable in the dim light. Were they watching him, waiting for him to make a mistake? He walked back to his horse, his hand never leaving the butt of his revolver. He untied the reins and swung into the saddle, his eyes scanning the rooftops and alleyways. He felt exposed, vulnerable. Even the shadows seemed to be conspiring against him. He started to ride out of town, slowly, cautiously. He passed a woman sweeping the porch of a dilapidated building. He asked her for directions earlier. Was she genuinely helpful, or was she leading him into a trap? He couldn't be sure. He spurred his horse into a gallop, leaving redemption behind, but the paranoia followed him like a shadow. He trusted no one, and in this desolate land, that might be the only way to survive. He hadn't ridden far when it happened. As he rounded a bend in the narrow canyon, gunfire erupted from the rocks above. Bullets whizzed past his head, kicking up dust. He ducked low in the saddle, urging his horse to greater speed. It was an ambush, no doubt about it. Someone knew he was coming, knew his route. The woman in redemption, maybe, or someone else entirely. He returned fire blindly, hoping to keep his attackers at bay. He needed to get out of the canyon, find some cover. He pushed his horse to its limit, the animal's hooves pounding against the rocky ground. A bullet grazed his arm, a searing pain. He grit his teeth, ignoring it. He couldn't afford to slow down. He saw an opening in the canyon wall, a narrow passage leading to higher ground. He veered towards it, taking a chance. He made it through, narrowly escaping the hail of bullets. He was alive, but wounded, and he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about the gold anymore. This was personal. Nursing his wounded arm, Walt found a secluded cave to rest and tend to his injury. As he cleaned the graze, he noticed something glinting in the lining of his saddlebag. He reached in and pulled out a small piece of paper, folded neatly. He unfolded it. It was a wanted poster. His wanted poster from 20 years ago, but someone had added something to it. A crude drawing of a lone pine tree, circled in red ink. Jeb, it had to be Jeb. He was the only one who knew about the posters, the only one with a grudge big enough to do this. The drawing was sloppy, almost childish, but unmistakable. It was too easy, too obvious. He stared at the poster, a sense of unease washing over him. It felt like a setup, a deliberate attempt to misdirect him. Was someone trying to manipulate him, to lead him down a false trail? He crumpled the poster in his fist. Something wasn't right. This was too simple. There had to be more to it than just Jeb's old grudge. He stared at the silver button, the coiled rattlesnake gleaming faintly in the dim light of the cave. The old-timer's words echoed in his mind, "You're digging in the wrong place." What did he mean? It wasn't just about the gold. It couldn't be. Someone had gone to elaborate lengths to set him up, to frame him. The body in his coat, the note with his name, this was about something bigger, something more sinister than a simple robbery gone wrong. He thought back to the heist. What else had they stolen that night besides the gold? Something that someone might want back, something worth killing for. He remembered whispers, rumors of documents hidden within the strongbox, valuable land deeds, secrets that powerful men would pay dearly to keep buried. The gold was just a distraction. He was a pawn in a much larger game, a game he didn't even understand. But he was about to learn the rules, and he was about to start playing for keeps. He remembered the woman sweeping the porch in Redemption. He dismissed her, barely giving her a second thought. But now... He rode back to Redemption, his mind racing. He found her sitting on the porch, the same broom in her hand. But something was different, her eyes. They were cold, calculating. "Maria?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. She smiled, a chillingly sweet smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hello, Walt, long time no see." He saw it then, the silver button pinned to her dress, a perfect match for the one he'd found on the body. The rattlesnake. It was Jeb or Selah's or even Sheriff Bartlett. It was Maria. "Why?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "You left me, Walt," she said, her voice hardening. "You promised me a new life, you lied." But it wasn't just about that, he realized. She'd been working for someone else all along, someone who wanted those documents. He'd been so blind, he had walked right into her trap. Walt forced Maria to ride with him back to the Lone Pine. The sun beat down on them, a silent witness to their deadly confrontation. The air crackled with tension. He stopped his horse near the tree, the same tree where he had buried his past, and now it seemed his future. Maria dismounted, her face a mask of cold determination. "Where are the documents, Walt?" she demanded, her hand resting on the pistol tucked into her waistband. "I don't have them," he said, telling the truth. "I never did." "Liar," she spat. "They were in the strongbox, I know they were." He realized then that she didn't know everything. She thought he had the documents, that he was the key to unlocking their power. He had a chance, a slim one, but a chance nonetheless. "Even if I had them," he said, his voice steady, "I wouldn't give them to you." The standoff had begun, under the watchful gaze of the Lone Pine. "Who are you working for, Maria?" Walt asked, his eyes narrowed. She hesitated, then sighed. "Selah's," she said. "He's been looking for those documents for years. They belong to his family, land deeds proving they own half this territory. They were stolen from them generations ago." "Selah's." "But he was just a quiet kid," Walt protested. "He played the fool, Walt, he always did, but he never forgot what was taken from his family. He knew you'd come back for the gold. He used me to lure you here, to get you to lead him to the documents." "And the body?" Walt asked. "Selah's needed to make sure you were framed, that you couldn't go to the law. The body was an outlaw, someone no one would miss." "Selah's knew about your coat, the tear. He planned everything, he even wrote the note himself." She paused, her eyes glistening with tears. "I didn't want it to come to this, Walt, but you left me no choice." Maria lunged, her pistol drawn. Walt reacted instinctively, diving behind his horse for cover. A bullet whizzed past his head, narrowly missing him. He drew his own revolver, his hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He knew he couldn't reason with her. She was too far gone, consumed by revenge and Selah's manipulations. He had to stop her, not just for himself, but for everyone Selah's was using. He risked a glance around the horse, spotting Maria taking aim. He fired, the shot ringing out in the still desert air. Maria cried out, clutching her shoulder. She staggered back, dropping her pistol. He knew it wasn't over. Selah's was out there somewhere, watching, waiting. Maria was just a pawn. He had to find Selah's, expose him, and end this nightmare once and for all. He used his outlaw skills and circled around. He found Selah's hiding behind the pine. Selah's raised his rifle, but Walt shot first. Selah's dropped. It was over. He approached Maria, his face grim. "Where are the documents?" he asked again. Maria looked up at him, her face etched with pain and regret. "They're not here, Walt," she whispered. "Silas hid them. He said they were in the church in Redemption, under the floorboards." Walt sighed. It wasn't over, not yet. He had to go back to that desolate town, face the ghosts of his past one last time. He looked at Maria, her life shattered by greed and revenge. He felt a pang of guilt, a reminder of the choices he had made, the lives he had ruined. He helped her onto his horse, ignoring the pain in his arm. He would take her to a doctor, give her a chance at redemption, something he wasn't sure he deserved himself. He defeated the betrayers, but at a cost. Silas was dead, Maria was wounded, and he was still haunted by his past. And the documents, the source of all this bloodshed, were still out there, waiting to be found. The story wasn't over, not by a long shot. He never did find the gold. It was gone, lost to time and betrayal. But as he rode towards redemption, with Maria clinging to him, he realized something. The gold didn't matter anymore. He had come seeking riches, but he had found something far more valuable, a chance to confront his past, to make amends for his mistakes. He knew he could never fully erase the sins of his outlaw life, but maybe, just maybe, he could start to build something new. He would find those documents, return them to their rightful owners, and try to undo some of the damage he had caused. He would help Maria find a path away from revenge and violence. As they rode into the setting sun, towards that ghost town and the secrets it held, Walt knew his journey was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, redemption was possible, even for an old outlaw like him.